Okay, guys, this is Fight Commentary Breakdowns, and this is probably going to go on Fight Commentary Chats when I edit it. We have Master Richard. I'll just call him Richard from now on. And he is a coach at All Rise MMA, All Rise Martial Arts. And we are also high school classmates. Look at that, man. So, dude, Richard, welcome.
Thank you, sir. It's great to be here. And I just want to say thank you so much, Jerry, for all the content that you create. I've been watching your videos for a long time, and I think you make some great stuff. And honestly, I really think that this social media, YouTube kind of fight network is really important for martial arts as a whole. You know, we got to see when UFC and MMA came on the scene, you know, what really works. You know, we got to see, you know, sumo versus kung fu and all that stuff. But now that we have, you know, hours and hours of these online fight videos every day, you can really see, you know, what happens when somebody's untrained, or what happens in, you know, this environment, or what happens when there's multiple attackers. And you know, it's unfortunate when you do see somebody get hurt or anything like that, but it is a really great case study for martial arts that you can go online and study this stuff. So I think, you know, what you're doing, especially, you know, the way that you do it so humbly, and, you know, you're a great communicator. You're like the Joe Rogan of YouTube. I think it's so important what you do out there for martial arts to keep evolving. And, you know, we can see, you know, what the next stage is going to be.
And dude, I appreciate that, Richard. And I got inspired because I realized there was so much content on YouTube, but the thing is, there wasn't anyone watching it. Like, people were watching it just going like, oh, he got KTFO, right? But there wasn't any further lessons from it. And, you know, I always approach the channel as, I'm not an expert. I just want to learn, and I want to keep training, but I also want to learn. So that's how the channel started. I just watch all these clips, and of course YouTube got stricter, so now I'm not watching street fights anymore. But before, man, learning all those lessons from all those gnarly street fights was so helpful. So
yeah,
Richard,
that's the mentality you need, even if you're a white belt, or even when you're like a trained person, as they say, keep that white belt mentality, and, you know, stay humble all the time.
Yeah. Exactly. And let's go from the beginning, Richard. Tell me, when you were a white belt, when was that? How many years ago was that?
Yeah, I was trying to think back on this. I'm actually the only boy in my family. I have 2 older sisters and 2 older stepsisters.
Wow.
And so growing up, I was really interested in kind of like boy stuff. I was like, what's going to separate me from these ladies? And you know, I loved, you know, martial arts movies. I loved Power Rangers, especially the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And I remember before I ever took martial arts, I was watching Power Rangers and like studying it. And I would go to recess in elementary school, and I would like teach my friends these moves from Power Rangers. And I'd be like, you know, if the putty guys attack you, like, this is what you need. You need like an uppercut and like a hammer fist and stuff. So I remember always being interested in that kind of rough and tough play, because as an only boy, you don't always get so much of that. But I started actually my martial arts training in Kung Fu, maybe 9 or 10 years old, actually, initially. And, you know, I was totally taken away. It was like being in like a Kung Fu movie. You know, they had the Wing Chun dummy and stuff, and I got to train with that. And I was really into it, you know, for I think about 6 months that I did it. I had the Kung Fu pants and the little slippers and stuff, and I really loved it. But we ended up moving. My mom, where she lived, she moved to a different house a little bit farther away. And so I had to leave that Kung Fu school. And she just drove by this Taekwondo studio, and they also did Hapkido, which I had no idea was at the time. But she literally like had to drag me into the studio. Even though I liked martial arts, I was kind of like a lazy, you know, I wanted to play video games all day. And so she literally like pulled me into the studio, and I still tell my students today, when I went into my Taekwondo studio for the first time, I remember like kind of hiding behind my mom. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. And I was probably maybe 11 at the time, but I was still, you know, decently tall. And my Taekwondo instructor saw my like long legs, and he was like, oh, you'd be perfect for Taekwondo. Like immediately he was like, oh, great for kicks. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize. And that I just really fell in love with. I had a great master there. You know, he was now he's a grandmaster in Taekwondo. He was a high level black belt in Hapkido, and he also had a degree in judo. I think he was a 3rd degree judo black belt. So he really had a great, you know, overall coverage of a lot of martial arts. And I trained there all of middle school, all of high school. You know, I ended up teaching there, and it just became so much a part of my life. And I really got to develop as a young man, you know, from that kid who was like hiding behind his mom to like, you know, somebody who, you know, wasn't afraid to speak in public as much, or, you know, be so outgoing. And even today, people don't believe me, but I am kind of a shy person. I don't love to do public speaking, but because of martial arts, you have to communicate with people and you have to be confident as, a black belt and all that. So I feel like that part of me, whenever I'm feeling shy, I'm like, well, come on, like you're a 4-3 black belt. You shouldn't be afraid to talk to somebody. Like, okay. But yeah, that was middle school and high school. And it was just a great time. It helped me grow up a lot and, get stronger physically. And then when I went away to college, I actually picked Texas A&M where I studied. They have a great Taekwondo team, a competition Taekwondo team. I didn't really compete that much in high school. I maybe did a couple tournaments, but we did sparring at my school, so I was comfortable with it. So I went to college and sparred on the Texas A&M sparring team for a little while. And while I was there, I actually discovered MMA training. They had an MMA club, they called it. And it was a lot of guys, from the different martial arts group, from the judo club, from the boxing club, from even Taekwondo and karate club. We would get together and all train together. And I really fell in love with that because, as you know, if you've, experienced MMA, there's so much, more freedom to be able to do whatever you like to do. And even from my Hapkido background, I had some grappling experience. We had some wrestling experience. I don't know if you've ever seen the Korean wrestling, it's called shiram, where they hold each other's belts and it looks like they're going to do like sumo wedgie style or something. I had done that a good amount at my old school. So I felt pretty comfortable, honestly, grappling for a Taekwondo guy. And I remember doing my first jujitsu class with the MMA group. And I told the guy, I was like, oh, my background is Taekwondo. And then like I got somebody in like a guillotine the first day. And he was like, what? I really enjoyed that training, and to be able to cross over and connect everything was really nice. The striking, the grappling, the wrestling. And I did that, I think the last 2 or 3 years of college, pretty regularly. We had little grappling tournaments in the school that we would go to and things. And then after college, I got my degree in zoology, animal science, actually. And I figured, well, I got my degree now, martial arts is more of a hobby, I'll go into, regular work like an adult. And I ended up working at the zoo in DC for a good amount of time.
Oh, wow.
But while I was doing that, I was like, I need to do something else. And I found a Taekwondo school that was looking for an instructor in Bethesda. And so I started working there for a couple years. And, again, I really kind of found my passion for teaching. I was doing more training on my own in college, but when I came back to really teach, working with kids, working with adults, I really fell in love with, martial arts again. And then I moved to New York, and I found a great Taekwondo school in New York that I worked at for a long time. They had a jiu-jitsu instructor that worked with everybody, so I got to work with him. I ended up joining a jiu-jitsu school in New York City. I got to train with Vitor Shaolin. He's like a 4-time black belt world champion. So, it was a lot of fun, and I got to compete a good amount in jiu-jitsu while I was there too. So, really, really diversifying, my training there between working at the Taekwondo school and training jiu-jitsu a lot. And then my instructor at the Taekwondo school is also very passionate about self-defense. And, I think all martial arts schools, no matter what you're training, they cover self-defense somewhat. But they always try to do it in context. If you go to a jujitsu based self-defense class, it's going to be pretty much all jujitsu. They talk about striking, but it's like, you want to get to mount and you want to armbar somebody. And then if you go to like a karate self-defense class, it's going to be more based on their karate techniques. Where as self-defense, I like to say, it's whatever works. It's not pretty. It's not a competition. It doesn't need to be stylish. If your self-defense technique is to scream at somebody's face and like get them to back up, that's a great technique. If it works, it's a good technique. So I really became interested in that because I think there is a disconnect between a lot of traditional martial arts and like practical self-defense. And even the martial arts that cover self-defense, like Krav Maga, they say that they're not a martial art, but that is, its own system. But I think there is still that kind of old school martial arts mentality where like our style is the best. This is the real fighting. Like this is the real self-defense. And especially like, as you've seen from so much, YouTube experience and everything, what happens in self-defense, there's so many different things that can happen. There can be weapons involved. There can be multiple attackers. There can be environmental hazards. So you're never going to be able to say, well, if A happens, you need to do B. Like, this is the set style that you need to follow. And so I really became interested in that and, how I could help my students with their confidence. I think one of the worst things that happens, and you talk about it a lot, is people getting martial arts training and then they become overconfident and, they think, well, now I'm a tough guy and I can go out on the street and, and handle myself. And then, worst thing that could happen is, they actually do get hurt. or, their mouth writes a check that their fist can't catch. And so I think, a lot of martial artists, we need to be more humble in that way. And that's a good thing about martial arts, that most of us are pretty humble. And, once you do spar full contact or roll and you get tapped, you're like, all right, well, maybe I don't want to fight. Like, even though I'm a bad fighter in my own, like, a bad A word, I'm good in my own right. Like, I don't want to have to get beat on the street. I don't want to have to get hurt. And I don't want to have to hurt anybody else. But I think, all of us need to be a little bit more humble and open-minded in that, white belt mentality, which is where we started. And so I'll wrap around back to that. And so even today, as I'm starting my own program, I'm definitely a white belt as a business owner and everything like that. But I try to remain humble and try to continue to learn as much as I can so that I can help my students and so that they can, help other people around them and inspire people around them, with what they know. And
I will go back to high school because I even remember back then in high school, your Taekwondo was good, man. Like, for a tall guy, a lot of Chinese Kung Fu movies love to stereotype the tall guy as like being non-nimble, right? But for a tall guy, you could kick high, you could move it. I remember I was like, wow, if that guy were placed, again, Kung Fu people, forgive how I thought. This is how I thought back in the day, insulting Kung Fu. But how I thought back then was if that tall dude were placed in Kung Fu, he would suck. Because he wouldn't be able to fit his body into what Kung Fu requires of him. But somehow him doing Taekwondo made him able to like take advantage of his height. So tell me about your Taekwondo training. It was World Taekwondo Federation training, right? And then how did you manage to be that tall dude who also was so deadly? Tell me about that.
So yeah, I'm World Taekwondo. It used to be the World Taekwondo Federation, WTF. They're just WT as of a couple years ago. But I've always trained that style. I didn't specifically seek it out, but I found out that it was like the Olympic style, and it's one of the most widespread styles. So I like that aspect of it. And Taekwondo, you just have to be flexible. There's no option. They expect white belts to be able to kick to their head height.
Wow.
And this is something that could take somebody 6 months, a year or more to be able to get to that flexibility. Training regularly. So that's just a prerequisite. And luckily, I started pretty young. I have kids that start at 3 and 4 years old and they can kick over their head no problem because they're just so young and flexible. But that's a prerequisite for Taekwondo. You just have to be flexible. I thank you for saying that I'm light on my feet. I don't particularly think I'm that light on my feet. Even as a heavyweight, I'm the heaviest weight class in Taekwondo and I'm not that heavy. But there are a great difference in styles as you go up in weight class in Taekwondo. We throw a lot less kicks than some of these guys that are 130 and 140 pounds, where they can really do the 720 kicks. And, I think that's a really cool part of Taekwondo is those demo aspects and that it is such a beautiful looking martial art. And that's part of the reason why it's so popular is that marketing aspect that, if you see somebody doing real Taekwondo, you're like, whoa, like I want to learn that.
Tell me about when you decided it was time to launch All Rise Martial Arts. Was that a recent thing or has that been around for a while?
Honestly, again, it goes back to kind of when I transitioned out of college and I got into the real world working environment. And I was like, wow, like, you really see what a 9 to 5, is kind of like. And I had a really close friend luckily say to me, well, if you were, a billionaire, like what would you do with your free time? If money wasn't a problem, what would you do? And, everybody knows that question, but I don't think a lot of people take it seriously. And I was like, well, I would do martial arts. I would train martial arts and teach martial arts. And at the time, I didn't think I was the right person to do it. I'd always trained under Korean masters. And, this sounds kind of silly in 2020, but being like a Caucasian American white man, I was like, I don't think anybody's going to learn Taekwondo from me, which is kind of silly to think of now. But I didn't see myself as that kind of instructor until I really started teaching more full time. I got to work with so many different diverse instructors and I got to see, that everybody has different things that they can bring to the table. And, just seeing how much I can help people and how much, my other instructors can help people, it really inspired me to take the next step. And so I've been thinking about starting my own martial arts company for years, but, with the pandemic and everything, it's been a really nice time to actually transition where I'm able to teach still virtually with a lot of my students and then able to focus also on like growing my business right now. So this has been this past year for me, getting together this whole business idea and everything, but it's been something in the back of my head for a long time, but it's something, it takes a risk, it takes a plunge to be like, all right, let's try to do my own thing here.
I see. And so if we were to describe all rise martial arts and the curriculum, is it, let's say, 60%, 80% Taekwondo, or is it kind of more mixed than that?
So I actually separate it out. It depends on, what my specific students want to work on. I have a Taekwondo specific curriculum that follows, the World Taekwondo Federation and the Kukiwan, which is the World Taekwondo headquarters. They have specific things that each belt level has to work on. And then most Taekwondo schools add on things to that. So I have a specific Taekwondo curriculum that I also add in like mandatory self-defense, so that every belt level you learn at least something from self-defense. And even things for kids, especially like anti-bullying is something that I'm really big on, so that they can learn, those kinds of social skills. And then even like leadership training, teaching training, things like that. So that's all in my Taekwondo curriculum. And then I have a self-defense curriculum that I work on, that I built with through working with a number of instructors throughout the years. So if somebody wants, specific self-defense training, I have, a whole curriculum that I can work through with them on that. And then I also have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that I work on too. And honestly, my self-defense is a mix between all of them. We go over effective strikes, things from Taekwondo. We go over effective grappling, things from Jiu-Jitsu too. And then, specific kind of situational kind of Krav Maga type things, or like weapons training I add into self-defense too. But I really see it as a blend. And honestly, Taekwondo is moving towards that, kind of whether they like it or not. I went to a master's licensing seminar actually in Colorado a couple of years ago, and I found it really interesting because we were learning the history and traditional Taekwondo, and there's competition Pumsai, which I'm sure you've seen the forms, and Taekwondo sparring, which gets a bad rap sometimes now, but even within those sports sides of Taekwondo, the Taekwondo grandmasters and great grandmasters, all these officials acknowledge that there's more that we need to teach. There's grappling techniques that we need to teach. There's self-defense techniques that we need to teach. And so when I went to this big Taekwondo summit, they were teaching us arm bars. Wow. They were teaching us like mount escapes. They were teaching us jiu-jitsu, and they were saying, you guys need to adapt this into your Taekwondo curriculum. This is the next generation. Wow. And I think that's so important to know that, that martial arts needs to grow and that Taekwondo needs to grow. Taekwondo just means the way of the hand and the foot. It's like karate. It means how you're going to use your empty hands and empty feet. Even though some Taekwondo schools train with weapons too. But just because there's a certain style of Taekwondo competition forms where they do a certain move a certain way, or Taekwondo sparring where they don't punch to the face, doesn't mean that Taekwondo people shouldn't punch to the face. If you're in a street fight or self-defense situation, there's no referee. Punch him in the face. So I think that's so important to know, that Taekwondo needs to evolve and adapt in all these things from martial arts and self-defense too.
Yeah, and it's awesome hearing from you that this is happening, because a lot of us aren't aware. And part of it, I think, why Richard knows so much is because you're already a fourth dan, right? You're a fourth dan in Taekwondo. So I think that's a good segue. Richard, tell me about when you got your first dan. How did that feel? Or when you got your black belt, how did that feel?
Oh man. Those kinds of things are things that stay with you for a whole lifetime. And I love to tell kids that, and adults that, who's ever testing for their black belt, you're going to remember this test forever. And it's a whole process. I think I trained probably 3 or 4 years before my first degree black belt test, multiple times, 3-4 times a week. I was even teaching as a red belt, as a brown belt at my old school. And there's a lot of schools have like a year or like a 6-month just lead up where you're only focusing on getting ready for your black belt test, conditioning, everything. And so I just remember, preparing for that time and, being so nervous. And, almost every school that I've seen, your black belt test, you have to fight multiple opponents. That's always a big thing. So like they love to have like 2 people against you or 3 people against you. And I remember my first degree test, we actually tested at one of our sister schools, another location. And they had all these black belts that I had never met before. And they're like, all right, you're going to spar with him and him and him. And I was like, oh. And I was maybe 15 or 16 at the time. And like, it really was almost like a gang initiation where these guys are just letting loose on you. And thank goodness, Taekwondo, you get to wear pads and armor and things like that, which is safe. But it really is a very challenging exercise to fight one person, and then somebody else is kicking you, and then somebody else is punching you. And you're like, what's going on? So I really remember that aspect of it, but it just brought out, something inside of me where you're like, survive. One-on-one sparring is a sport. 2-on-1, 3-on-1, this is like a survival situation. And so I really remember that from my belt test. And I just remember being so sore afterwards. I went home and I laid in my bed for like 2 hours and I felt like I got hit by a car. But it was a really great experience. And same thing for my second, third, and my fourth retest. I mean, all of them were grueling. All of them were so memorable. But afterwards, it's just so emotional. You make it to this like pinnacle. And having your community there, having people that you love there, your family and friends supporting you is just so awesome. I remember my fourth degree black belt test, I straight up cried. Mm-hmm. I was so emotional. I'm like, my students are watching me. Like, I can't believe this.
Wow.
But, it really is something that you can't imagine, when you're a color belt, getting to black belt is such this big goal. Mm-hmm. But then when you get to black belt and you get to fourth degree black belt in Taekwondo as a master, it's something that's like almost unattainable to reach. So, it was something that I was really happy with and really proud of, and I'll never forget that for sure.
And I think that's really interesting because we were talking about how self-defense versus martial arts and stuff. When you first became a black belt, you were still in high school, right? Did you have a phase where you felt like, oh my God, I can beat up anyone? Or did that phase kind of very quickly dissipate, or did it never happen?
I'll be honest with you. I've never been a person who's gotten to a ton of physical conflicts. I think I'm very lucky in that way. I think like you, I have a sense of humor about me. And so it takes a lot to offend me. First of all, I'm never going to be that guy where like you say something to me or like spill a drink on me and I'm like, get over here. And so, I think I'm not going to start a fight. And then people that start fights with me too, I have some good, they call it Kungfu, where I could talk myself out of, situations, be like, look, calm down, buddy. And then also, like you said, being, kind of tall helps too. Being a larger person, people don't necessarily want to pick fights. But it wasn't until maybe like senior year of high school, I had one of my friends tell me, he's like, you have some decent fighting experience. Like you've done a lot of sparring, like you would be able to handle yourself in a conflict if you needed to. And I was like, I guess you're right. Like it's nothing I've ever seeked out, but compared to somebody untrained, a situation like that is much more reasonable for me to be able to handle. But I think that's also why I've been able to avoid fights, because I don't see them as this big thing. This is my last case scenario. Like you've offended my honor. Now we're going to wrestle. Like, if we want to wrestle, we can wrestle. And I've told that to people too. I went to school in Texas. Those boys like to fight, like to wrestle. And I've been to many a house party where I'm like, dude, do you want to go back? Like we can go in the backyard and just roll. Like I don't mind. We don't have to fight. We don't have to argue. Like
yeah.
So I don't see it as a big emotional release or anything like that. It's just another part of my life.
Wow, that's so interesting. And talking about Texas, that sounds like pretty funny that like in parties with the alcohol fu, people start believing they have real Kung Fu, right? So you've had to tell people, look, stop trying to like pick a fight in front of everyone. Like, you want to fight, we could go back and just like spar. You've told people that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And that usually diffuses the situation too.
Yeah, exactly.
If you tell somebody honestly with a smile, you're like, oh, like, do you want to fight? Like, cool. Like, I'm totally down. Like, I have a mouth guard. Like, let's go.
Yeah, dude, having a mouth guard, man, that really diffuses it. If they see you take out your mouth guard, they're like, okay, that dude probably does take punches. Okay, all right, I changed my mind.
Yeah. Because 90% of the time it's just peacocking, it's just chest puffing, and they want you to back down. And if you're like, oh, like no problem, then it takes away a lot of the gas from the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, it's it really is important how much if you train and you train safely, but also train realistically, it does take away a lot of that wanting to fight. Like Master Richard and I talked about this before I even set up this interview, but I will be the first person, if someone's sketchy, I'm not even going to walk in the same direction as him. I don't care. Well, if someone's going to call me a wuss, I don't care, because I get punched in the face twice a week. I don't need to get punched in the face more. Like, I know I can handle it, but I don't want to get punched in the face. It's never comfortable, right?
Yeah. I think so many people out there in the world, and especially young men, they have this bottled up testosterone. They have this bottled up aggression. And unfortunately in society today, we don't have that many outlets for it that are, proper and, people support. And so if they're not doing sports, if they're not, working out or something like that, then they just have this tension in them all the time. And, it could be something that, maybe a therapist could help with. It could be something emotional, but just biologically as a young man, you have this like boiling testosterone that you need some kind of outlet for.
Yeah.
You need some kind of recreational activity. And if you don't have that in martial arts, you know, I would be walking around like, yeah, like, do you want to fight? Like, I would definitely be much more tense.
Yeah, yeah. And I told Master Richard this too, but in high school, I didn't do martial arts, right? And I was always just kind of angry. Like because I had so much martial arts before high school, and I was like Richard said, I was developing my sense of humor by then. So thank goodness I didn't get into much confrontation, but I definitely still had it in me. I was like, man, this thing's waiting to pop out. And it usually would pop out at home. I would punch the wall. But I wish I had martial arts when I was in high school, man. Imagine how martial arts could have helped me with everything if I did it in high school and college. I was so lost in college. So I tell people, when in doubt, man, there's probably two things to do. One is go to church, and the second thing is train martial arts. I think those are two good things. You know, if you're not a Christian, it's okay. Still go to church, try it out. And then the second thing is, if you don't think martial arts is for you, try it out anyways, because it's not just about how to fight. There's a lot more to martial arts than going to church.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's some disconnect, either mentally, physically. Most people, it's both. You know, most people have something that's unsettling them in their mind and their spirit, and then they have this energy in their body that they don't have anything outlet for. And I think, you know, it's a great time nowadays with COVID where people are taking more attention to self-care and paying more attention to themselves. So I think, you know, for anybody out there, it's a great time to get into it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that doing martial arts has really taught me is that a lot of times the body is much stronger than you might feel, right? We get ads all the time on television, even now on YouTube. It's like making us think our bodies are always broken. We need a lot of stuff. But the beauty of our bodies is that if we balance it, if we eat right, if we sleep right, if we do the right exercises, we can heal most of our things. You know, if you cut off your arm, you probably can't heal that, right? Which probably that's only 10 years down the line. We're going to be able to regrow limbs eventually. But, you know, like most injuries, you can heal from. It's amazing how much the body can heal. And you can't really understand that unless you occasionally get injured. Of course, we want to train safely, but you're going to get bruises and stuff inevitably, stuff like that. But the key is if you just realize where the weakness is, you keep training it, you heal it. Yeah, and I guess that's a good segue too, because, you know, Richard, you have a fourth dan and you also do other stuff. So you're an MMA person in addition to a Taekwondo master. And have you noticed kind of training regimens evolve to be more safe or kind of take into account more studies about the brain and stuff like that?
Well, that's one reason, honestly, why I took a step back from Taekwondo sparring and focused more on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You know, especially my weight class, you know, we're the heavier guys. We kick hard, especially Taekwondo. You're liable to get kicked in the head. Yeah. And it's not something that I particularly want to train doing. You know, any martial art that you do, if you're going to compete, you should be training multiple times a week. And it's like, do I want to be getting hit in the head multiple times a week? Like, not really. And it's not even the pain aspect of it, but it's knowing that CTA, you know, is just building and building and building and building. You know, you can only take so many shots. You know, I don't mind getting punched in the nose or punched in the face, but if I'm going to do it 100 times, you know, this month or this year, like I'm going to think twice. Yeah. So I love grappling for that. I think jiu-jitsu is going to continue to blow up in the next couple of years because it is a great martial art. It has all the benefits of martial art, but so much less impact, particularly on your brain. You will still get hurt in jiu-jitsu. I will say that. You'll still get, you know, injured with your joints and things like that, your back, your neck. But the biggest thing you need to protect is your brain. You know, like you said, there's all kinds of therapies coming out that can help with, you know, your joints or your back. But like your brain, I feel like is still something that we need to work on. So I saw that in my personal evolution. But as far as experience-wise, I've seen the gambit from different gyms, as far as people practicing old school still, and then people practicing new style still. And the crazy thing is that they're both successful. You know, I've seen people that are competitors that train, you know, old school Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or old school Taekwondo, and they can still do really well. And it might just be that they're great athletes. But then I've seen people now, especially train more scientifically, more advanced, and they can also be successful. And so I think, you know, like we said, it's about being humble and, you know, taking what works for you, you know, being able to listen and try out different things, try out different modalities, but ultimately like listening to your body and seeing what's the best way to work for you. But I've seen it all, people training like boneheads and then people training like, rocket scientists.
Yeah. And I think a great thing I will repeat from what Richard said is really listen to your own body, right? So don't do something because everyone else is doing it. Don't do something because some scientist says it. Sure, put some weight on it, but it doesn't mean that scientist is always speaking to you because everyone's body is different. Everyone's experience is different. A lot of treatments, for example, they'll be like 99.9999% effective, right? It's never 100%. So you always have to remember that. Or like you have a 0.0001% of experiencing something, right? And you might be that person. So like don't always think, okay, because everyone's doing it this way, I have to do it this way, even though I don't feel comfortable. I feel like something's lacking. So I think that's something really important that I want to pull out of what Richard said.
And that's how you can really tell, there's a lot of old school masters that are like, it's my way or the highway. And I'm sure there's a lot of them that are great instructors and they teach very decent stuff, but I don't prefer, as somebody that has their own program, I don't prefer to have that mentality. If one of my students brought to me a technique and they're like, oh, have you ever tried this? And I hadn't, I'd be like, oh, let's try it. Let's see how it works. And I think that's, how we're going to get to the next level of martial arts.
Exactly. So, Richard, if they wanted to train with you and anyone who sees this wants to do virtual classes with you, what would they search?
So if you look up All Rise Martial Arts, ALLRISE, I had to do a spelling test there. All Rise Martial Arts, we're at allrisema.com. I'm doing private lessons both virtually and outdoors right now. This is my little Zoom gym setup, and we've really been successful with a lot of the Taekwondo, especially over Zoom. And that was something that I thought was really interesting. A lot of traditional martial arts like karate, Taekwondo, Kungfu, some of the kickboxing MMA guys make fun of them because of their kata and their forms, and it's meant to be training by yourself. Pumse or something is meant to be practice that you do when you don't have a partner, you don't have a punching bag, you don't have something like that. And other martial arts do it. They do shadow boxing and drills like that. But especially with the pandemic where you have to be by yourself, kata and pumse and forms are a great way to keep your martial arts sharp without any equipment. Go out to your backyard, go out to your park and do your forms. And I was training jujitsu over Zoom for a little bit when the schools shut down. And I thought it was really interesting that my jujitsu coach started teaching forms, started teaching kata. And they would make us memorize these sequences of like individual moves. It's like, all right, you're going to do a break fall, you're going to do a single leg takedown, you're going to do a hip escape. And I'm like, this is just pumse. So I think that's a really cool aspect. And that's why I'm happy to work with anybody over Zoom. I have students across the country and across the world. Even if it's just, just to get a refresher or just to get interested in martial arts, I'd love to help people, find their way and get into it. I think that there is a learning curve and, it can be kind of intimidating to start martial arts. But I think, like you said, it's so beneficial for everybody. And there's so much variety out there for people to choose from. There is literally an instructor and a style for everybody out there. And you will get so much benefit, even if you're not going to be the UFC heavyweight champion, or even if you're not going to be some, street fighter, self-defense person, but you'll get more flexible, you'll get stronger, you'll get more confident, you'll get so many benefits from properly training martial arts. And that's really what my goal is with All Rise, is that martial arts can not only help the practitioners, but help the entire community around them. When you have somebody that's confident, when you have somebody that's aware, when you have somebody that's healthy, people around them gravitate towards that. And, they want to also follow that kind of lifestyle. So that's why with my program, I don't want to just help my students. I want to help everybody elevate up. So feel free to check us out, allrisema.com. And you can always shoot me an email, richard@allrisema.com.
Yeah. And Richard, I wanted to follow up on something very important that you said, which is about katas, aka, taolu, as we say in Chinese, or I think the word in Korean is pumse.
Pumse, yes.
Yeah, pumse. So I was actually talking to another guy. His name's Jordan. He is on Ramsey Dewey's channel a lot, but we were talking about this and we're like, exactly what you said, Richard. Think of katas as the people's old way of shadow boxing. Because the thing about shadow boxing is until you become a really good martial artist at whatever you're trying to do shadow boxing, you don't know how to create cool moves. So what katas, what all of that's doing, what forms are doing is it's kind of giving you some variation. So you got to, it's actually helping. It's like literally like shadow boxing, but like advanced shadow boxing. You're literally like all these variations in shadow boxing that you never thought about. Oh, it's in my form now. So that's how I think about forms, even though, like you said, people talk smack about forms, katas, taolu, pumse, whatever the word is. But really, if you think of it as, yeah, well, sometimes when I'm shadow boxing, I don't want to just be throwing, I don't want to just be doing this. Or what if there's other things to do? Well, look into some of the pumse, the kata, the taolu of the old. You might find other variations, other combos that you're not doing right now that you can actually implement next time you spar.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we also do it in self-defense. You know, we do shadow boxing, but I love to do it in different scenarios. You know, try to shadow box next time you're shadow boxing, do it in your bathroom, you know, when it's a tight environment, or do it with, you know, maybe you have a weapon, maybe you have like a pen in your hand and you're, you know, setting up blocks with one hand and you're throwing strikes with the other hand. You know, do it, imagine you have an injury, take one arm out of the picture and then just try to shadow box and block with one hand. You know, there are so many ways to improvise, and I always stress that martial arts is an art. You know, this is a creative area. And when we're training on our own, when we're training with other people, when we're sparring, it's time for you to honestly express yourself. You know, as Bruce Lee said, you know, martial arts is honestly expressing. But that's how I express all art. You know, when you're painting, you're honestly expressing. When you're dancing, you're honestly expressing. And I think that is such a hidden benefit of martial arts that people forget. They focus so much on the martial and not enough on the arts. And I think that's a really cool part, especially of Pumse, but even sparring too. It's time for you to improvise. It's time for you to create. And it's time for you to get in that flow state and really show, you know, what's your inner emotion. I'm going to do Pumse differently or sparring differently, you know, depending on my mood that day.
Exactly. Dude, this was a great conversation. And everyone, this was Master Richard, aka Richard, from All Rise Martial Arts. So Richard, let's definitely have you back. Maybe next time we can do a video together in person outside or something like that, or we could watch some fights and commentate together. So I'm sure Richard will be back on this channel, whether on Fight Commentary Chats or in the main channel.
Yeah, absolutely. Love speaking with you, Jerry. And again, I think it's a really cool, important mission that you have to be able to share martial arts with people that might not necessarily experience it, and just make it more digestible for them. So more power to you, and I can't wait for more of your content.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, Fight Commentary Chats out.